Welcome back. It is not an easy time to be a Senate Democrat right now. They are stuck defending an unpopular president. More than half of Democrats say Biden should not run again, according to our new poll. They have a precarious Senate majority, as Senator Dianne Feinstein's absence has left some judicial nominees in limbo. And now in the wake of reports that Justice Clarence Thomas may have violated the law, never disclosing a real estate deal and an expense-paid luxury trips from billionaire donor Harlan Crow, Judiciary Committee Chairman Dick Durbin has asked the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and head of the judiciary branch of government, John Roberts, to appear before his committee, citing a, quote, steady stream of revelations regarding justices falling short of the ethical standards expected of other federal judges. And Democratic Senator Dick Durbin joins me now. Senator Durbin, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you, Chuck.
And I want to start with this issue involving trying to create formal ethics standards for Supreme Court justices. You invited Chief Justice Roberts. He appears to have responded by saying, thank you, go ask the judicial reform folks for somebody. Do you believe he has turned your invitation down? Some of us are debating whether that response is an official decline of your invite.
Well, I don't view that as an official response, and we're still waiting for the Chief Justice to answer my invitation. I think that's the first step that ought to be taken, that the Supreme Court itself, with its leader, the Chief Justice, make it clear that they are going to bring reform when it comes to ethics to the court and spell out what they're going to do. I asked the Chief Justice 10 years ago the very question we're asking today. What is the court going to do to bring its standards of ethics up to the level even of other courts in this country?
I want to talk about the specifics of Justice Thomas here and ask you this question. The sale of Thomas's mother's house and the adjacent lots without disclosure on that annual financial filing, would it be a violation of law if he were just on the circuit? Because in Section 5 of the U.S. Code, it reads, it shall be unlawful for any person to knowingly and willfully falsify any information that such person is required to report under Section 102. Fail to file or report any information that such person is required to report. Point is, if this were a Judge Thomas, this is perhaps a crime. Now, it is not clear this would apply to Justice Thomas. Is that your understanding?
That's exactly the point, Chuck. If this were another judge, if this were a member of Congress, and it happened that some Texas billionaire came in and said, I'm going to buy your mom's house and the house is nearby, and own this so she doesn't have to pay rent or a mortgage payment, you'd say to yourself, well, that's obvious. That's the sort of thing that needs to be disclosed. That's a clear indication of a conflict of interest. Is there a question that should be raised? So yes, there's no question in my mind that the Supreme Court has exempted itself from standards that apply to the executive and legislative branch and even to other judges.
So what could, I mean, look, we have a separation of powers issue, and we could talk about that, right? The Supreme Court would have to decide whether a law Congress passed to apply to the justices pass that test of separation of powers. That's a tough test to pass. What would legislation look like that would enforce an ethical code of conduct on justices?
Well, the code of conduct would look an awful lot like the code that applies to the rest of federal government and other judges, and basically would have disclosures, timely disclosures of transactions like this purchase of the justice's mother's home. It would also give standards for recusal, so that if there's going to be conflict before the court and a recusal, it be explained publicly, and investigations of questions that are raised. It is the same standard that's being used across the board. Code of conduct, ethics laws applied to the court. Why this Supreme Court, these 9 justices, believe they are exempt from the basic standards of disclosure, I cannot explain. And I think Chief Justice should appear before our committee and explain something or explain the changes that he's going to make.
Why not invite Justice Thomas?
I think I know what would happen to that invitation. It would be ignored. It is far better from my point of view to have the Chief Justice here. Listen, this is John Roberts' court. We are dealing with a situation where history will remember it as such. I was there when he went through his confirmation hearing. He is an articulate, well-schooled man when it comes to presenting his point of view. I'm sure he'll do well before the committee. But history is going to judge the Roberts Court by his decision as to reform And I think this is an invitation on May 2nd for him to present it to the American people.
Let me move to some politics here. A supermajority in our poll, Senator Durbin, 70%. You can't get 70% of Americans to agree on much, but 70% of Americans don't think President Biden should seek a second term. Does that give you cause for concern, especially when you look at the numbers inside the Democratic coalition? Particularly younger voters are very skeptical of whether he should run again.
It's about 19 months before there's an election. Most people make their decision on the candidate 19 days before the election. So we're far in advance of any decision making. Here's what we do know. This president has shown extraordinary leadership. On the foreign policy side, he has mobilized NATO and expanded NATO to respond to a threat by Vladimir Putin in Ukraine and beyond. He is moving forward when it comes to a relationship with China, which is much better for the American economy, I think, in the short term, and I think establishes long-term standards. Then when you look at the domestic front, Governor Sununu doesn't want to talk about it, but let me tell you, there is a realignment of American voters over this issue of choice and women's reproductive rights. The Republican Party is on the wrong side of history by a long shot, and we're seeing this realignment in elections. The recent mayoral election in the city of Chicago several weeks ago, one of the major questions, what's your position on choice? That would not have been a question raised in most mayoral contests before it. We also have the kind of leadership when it comes to climate change, which the American people are wanting, and we have a position that actually makes sense when it comes to gun safety. I listened to Governor Sununu, and it's mindless to think that we have the kind of death rate going on. It's the leading cause of death, gun violence, the leading cause of death of young people under the age of 21 in America. For goodness sakes, doesn't it tell the story? He says we want to have limited government. Well, I can just tell you, people want to be safe from assault weapons and the kind of profligate gun ownership that is not responsible.
I want to get you to respond to this morning's New York Times, though, on this issue of President Biden. They believe he hasn't done enough to reassure Americans that he's up to the job. They note this. His standard line is, the only thing I can say is watch me, about the ability to be president and serve a second term in his 80s. But Mr. Biden, the Times writes, has given voters very few chances to do just that, to, quote, watch him. And his refusal to engage with the public regularly raises questions about his age and health. Again, this comes from the New York Times, not some right-wing blog about this. Should President Biden be doing more to show Americans that he's up to the job?
I think his schedule reflects an active person, mentally and physically, who is engaging with the American people on a regular basis. I don't know what more they're asking for, but I've been in meetings with him time after time. His performance tells me he's up to the job and does it well. Let's concede the obvious, what his age is, but let's look at the obvious. He is an active president who is meeting the challenges of America every day.
A coalition of more than 60 California progressive groups are calling on Senator Dianne Feinstein to resign now. I know you have not made that call. At what point does her absence make you rethink whether you should publicly also add your voice to the calls of asking her to resign her Senate seat?
Dianne Feinstein is my friend. She's my colleague. We sit next to one another on the Judiciary Committee. She's done extraordinary things in her public career. Let's face it, she's gone through several weeks of real travail over this shingles issue that she is obviously dealing with. She wants to come back. She said to Chuck Schumer on the phone last week, I want to get on that plane next Monday and be there. I want her to come back too, but her future is in her own hands and her family's consultation. I wish her the best, and I hope she can return very soon. When
was the last time, have you personally spoken with her by phone or any other means since she got out of the hospital? No?
No, I haven't.
Just Senator Schumer?
It's been several weeks. Schumer has, yes.
And when you guys organized with a 50-50 Senate, you had a mechanism that allowed for any sort of any tie committee vote to be where you could move that nomination to the floor for a full vote. You didn't include that when you guys ended up with a one-seat majority. Was that a mistake?
No, I think we reflected the reality. A 50-50 Senate said that if you have a tie vote, you can discharge it to the floor. When you have a 51-49 Senate, we have a nominal majority, and the rules reflect that reality. We have to have a majority vote coming out of the committee. If we don't have a majority vote, if it's a tie vote in the committee, then the nomination does not move forward. So that's the reality of the composition of the Senate today.
Okay. And any regrets on keeping Senator Feinstein on the Judiciary Committee at the beginning? I mean, this was not news to folks that she had some challenges.
Listen, she's served on this committee for decades and served with distinction. And she stepped aside from the chairmanship and gave me an opportunity to serve as chairman and wanted to remain on the committee for other issues that were important to her. It made sense, and I think it was the right decision at the time.
President Biden has said he's not going to negotiate on the debt ceiling at all. Is there a point where more Democrats are starting to question whether a no talk, a no negotiation stance is whether that's really a good idea? Do you think that's still a good idea?
Listen, we don't need to default in this country. If we default on our national debt, it's going to cost our economy dearly. We're going to find businesses unable to proceed and people losing their jobs right and left. That is a terrible outcome. So let's do the responsible thing and not default, move forward on the debt ceiling. Now, we can have a fulsome debate on the budget, and we will, and I understand it, on the spending levels, but not at the expense of jeopardizing jobs and economic growth in America. Don't default. Avoid default on our national debt.
You didn't say don't talk. I did grab that.
Of course we should talk.
Okay.
No, the conversation should be underway, but should be on the budget resolution and on the appropriations process and entitlement reform, if that's part of the agenda. That should all be separate from the question of the debt ceiling.
All right.
Don't default. Avoid default.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois. Senator, thanks for coming on, sharing your perspective.
Good to be with you, Chuck.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.